The story begins with a bald and powerfully built man named Bradley, who works as a car mechanic for a living. That day, Bradley arrived at the garage with a broken-down car just like any other day. But when he got there, he noticed that the garage owner was waiting for him with an impatient look on his face, which made Bradley a little curious. Bradley already understood before even sitting down that he was about to lose his job, and that is exactly what happened. The owner told him that the garage had been going through some financial difficulties lately, and because of that, he had no choice but to let go of some of his workers. But the truth was that this was nothing more than an excuse, because Bradley was a tough and no-nonsense kind of man, and the owner wanted to replace him with someone who would agree with everything he said and never push back. Now, since Bradley was not the type to argue or create a scene, he simply went to the locker room, collected his belongings, got into his car, and drove home without saying a single word to anyone. This is the moment where Bradley's life starts going downhill, and that downfall stays with him all the way to the very end of this story. When Bradley stopped his car in front of his house, he saw his wife Lauren sitting inside her own car talking to someone on the phone, and something about that made Bradley suspicious. He stood there watching her for a while, trying to figure out what was going on, and once he was sure something was wrong, he walked straight up to Lauren's car and asked her to open the door. Lauren smiled and said that he had come home quite early from work today, and it was right at that moment that Bradley noticed the marks of someone's lips on her neck. He asked her to hand over her phone, and when she refused, he took it from her himself, and what he found on that phone confirmed everything he had feared, because she had been talking to another man. Bradley told Lauren in a firm voice to go inside the house, and when she tried to explain herself, he repeated himself, and Lauren quietly went inside. Now, just a short while ago, he had lost his job, and now on top of that, he had discovered that his wife had been seeing someone else behind his back, which had made him even more troubled and frustrated than before. So he directed all of that built-up anger toward Lauren's car, and by the time he was done with it, his hands were badly injured, and he had not even realized it. After that, he composed himself and went inside the house and asked Lauren directly how long she had been involved with this other person, and Lauren told him everything, that for the past 3 months she had been in a relationship with someone else. The real reason behind all of this was that a short while ago, Lauren had gone through an abortion, and after that, she had been feeling very low and sad. And since Bradley was always caught up in his work, she would often sit alone at home, feeling invisible and empty. And in order to fill that emptiness, she had turned to another man. Hearing everything Lauren said, Bradley realized that he had not been giving her the time and attention she needed, and he apologized to her for that and told her that, from this very moment, both of them were going to start fresh and build a new life together, and Lauren agreed to give their relationship another chance. After that, Bradley told Lauren that he had lost his job, and that from now on he was going to work for a man named Gil, who ran a drug operation. The moment Lauren heard the name Gil, she told him clearly that she did not want him to go back to that life, and reminded him that he himself had once said he would never work with Gil again. Bradley told her that he understood, but in their current situation, they simply could not survive without a stable income. And right now, he had no other way out, and he promised her that he would handle everything carefully and not take any unnecessary risks. And Lauren had nothing more to say after that. The story then moves 18 months forward, and by this point, Bradley's life had changed completely, because the money coming in from this work was substantial, and he was now living in a large house with 2 or 3 luxury cars parked outside, and Lauren was only a few days away from giving birth to their child, which had brought a new kind of happiness into both of their lives. But as we all know, the result of choosing the wrong path always catches up with a person sooner or later. One evening, Bradley and Lauren were finally getting a moment to themselves when Gil called and asked him to come over right away. So Bradley got into his car and left immediately, and from the expression on Lauren's face, it was very clear that she was not at all happy with the life he was living. Bradley reached Gil's place shortly after.
Did your dad pick out that outfit?
You like it?
And that is where he came face to face with a man named Eleazar, who had strong connections across Mexico and needed a job done. A little while later, Eleazar showed up at the meeting with his 2 men, Roman and Pedro, and told Bradley that he wanted him to handle an important operation, and that Roman and Pedro would be working alongside him. But Bradley refused to accept the job because he felt that Roman had the look of someone who was reckless and unpredictable, and Bradley was worried that Roman's carelessness could end up putting all of them in front of the police. Gil then took Bradley aside and told him that this job could be very profitable for all of them, and also promised that once Bradley's child was born, he would be given 3 full months off with no work and no calls. After thinking it over, Bradley agreed to take the job, but on one condition, and that was that he would be the one making all the decisions. And both Roman and Pedro would have to follow his instructions without question, and Eleazar accepted those terms. Bradley then gave Roman a quick test and asked him that if he were to say, "throw the goods into the water," what would Roman do? And Roman answered that he would throw it. And with that, the deal was finalized between them. That night, all 3 of them reached a port, and before they could even get onto the boat, Roman started doing things his own way, which irritated Bradley. But before he could say anything, Pedro stepped in and reminded Roman that they had all agreed to follow Bradley's lead. So Bradley took control of the boat himself and navigated carefully to the right location where he stopped and checked his surroundings thoroughly before giving the signal. Pedro then put on a diving suit and went into the water and came back up with a box. And inside that box were drugs worth $3 million that had been hidden underwater. They emptied out all the packets from the box, threw the box back into the water, and headed back toward the port. But on the way back, Bradley suddenly threw his own packet into the water and told the other two to do the same because something did not feel right to him. Roman and Pedro completely ignored his warning and instead turned on Bradley and attacked him. Bradley held back his anger, let them go, and started making his way toward the boat, and that is when out of nowhere, the police surrounded Roman and Pedro and gunfire broke out from both sides. Bradley knew he could not afford to get caught, so he started thinking of a way to slip away quietly, but then he heard police officers calling out for help and a plan formed in his mind. He decided to approach the situation as an innocent bystander who had come to help, which would stop the police from suspecting him. So he came around from behind and shot Pedro first, and then Roman. But despite all of that, the police still arrested him. He was taken in for questioning where a detective named Watkins asked him about the drugs and about what he was doing at the port that night, and Bradley tried to steer the conversation away from anything incriminating. The detective could sense that Bradley was a careful and intelligent man, but he had no concrete evidence to connect him to the drugs. However, Bradley had still killed 2 people, and that was enough to hold him. Before his court hearing, Bradley was allowed one last visit with Lauren, and he told her to look after herself and their unborn child, and not to worry, because he had saved enough money from his work to make sure that she and the child would live comfortably. After that, Bradley was sentenced to 7 years in prison for murder and illegal possession of weapons, and was sent to a prison called Franklin. The moment he arrived, he was made to remove everything, including his wedding ring, and after a health check, he was placed in a cell with an older prisoner named Lefty, where they were both introduced to the prison's management officer, Andre, who walked them through the rules of the facility and made it very clear that whenever the bell rang, every prisoner was expected to step out of their cell immediately without delay. Bradley was then locked in his cell, and he sat there going over everything in his mind, thinking about how badly things had gone because of his decision to work with Eleazar, and eventually the exhaustion caught up with him, and he fell into a deep sleep. When the bell rang for roll call, every prisoner came out and stood in line. But Bradley was still fast asleep, which meant that all the other prisoners had to go without food that day, and when he finally came out much later, Andre confronted him immediately and reminded him of the rules and gave him a final warning that from that point on, he was expected to stay disciplined and respect every rule in that facility. The scene then shifted to Lauren, who was asleep at home when she suddenly sensed that someone had broken into the house, and she immediately pulled out a gun from the drawer. But before she could do anything, she was hit by a taser gun and fell unconscious to the floor. Back at Franklin, Lefty told Bradley that he had a visitor, and when Bradley went to meet whoever it was, he found a woman doctor named Denise sitting across from him, who told him that she had received a call from a Dr. Placid, who she had been told was Lauren's doctor, and that Placid had informed her that Lauren's pregnancy was facing serious complications and that he wanted to meet Bradley the following morning at 10 o'clock. This left Bradley confused because Lauren had never once mentioned anyone called Dr. Placid to him. The next morning, Bradley met this Dr. Placid, but he had no idea who this man was, because in reality, Placid was not a doctor at all and had nothing to do with Lauren's medical care, since he was actually one of Eleazar's men playing the role of a doctor. Placid told Bradley that because of the failed operation, Eleazar had suffered a loss of $3 million, and then he slid a photograph across the table, and it was a picture of Lauren who had been kidnapped. Placid told him that Eleazar was furious, and that he intended to kill both Lauren and her unborn child unless Bradley agreed to do one thing for him. The condition was that Bradley had to go to Redleaf Prison and find a man named Christopher who was serving a life sentence in Block 99 and kill him. And if he did that, Eleazar would forgive him and release both Lauren and the baby unharmed. Bradley sat there completely at a loss because he could not see any way out of this. Andre, was walking him back to his cell. Bradley suddenly pulled off his shoe and launched himself at Andre, beating him badly, and eventually breaking one of his arms, and he was doing all of this deliberately because the only way he could get transferred to Redleaf Prison was to make himself look like an extremely dangerous prisoner. When the other guards rushed in, Bradley took them all on two until one of them brought him down with a taser, and after that the prison decided he was too dangerous to keep at Franklin and had him transferred to Redleaf. When Bradley arrived at Redleaf, Warden Tuggs was there to greet him, along with his men, and Tuggs made it very clear that Bradley had made the worst decision of his life by ending up there because Redleaf was not like any other prison and the conditions inside were absolutely brutal. After his inspection, Bradley was put into Block 59 instead of Block 99, and when he saw the state of his cell, he understood exactly what Tuggs had meant, because the previous prisoner had left the cell in a condition that was beyond description, and the smell alone was unbearable. But Bradley covered his nose with his shirt and went to sleep because he was ready to endure anything for the sake of his family. When he was allowed outside for 60 minutes, Bradley immediately started looking for Christopher and came across a prisoner named Derek and asked him if he knew anyone by that name. And Derek told him straight that there was no prisoner called Christopher anywhere in Redleaf, which left Bradley completely puzzled. He then noticed a group of prisoners exercising nearby and walked toward them despite Derek warning him that those men were unstable and dangerous. The prisoners immediately got in his face, and Bradley provoked them into a fight, and he was doing this on purpose because he needed to get himself thrown into Block 99, and the only way to do that was to keep causing trouble. A guard fired into the air to stop the fight, and when more guards arrived, Bradley turned on them too until Tugs came down himself and ordered them to cover Bradley's face and take him directly to Block 99, which was an underground cell buried beneath the prison. They strapped an electronic shock shield onto him, threw him into a cell covered in shards of broken glass, and Tugs took the remote and started sending electric shocks through the device until Bradley was lying on the floor, barely able to move. The scene shifted to Lauren, who was being kept somewhere in a terrible condition, and Dr. Placid was there taking photographs of her, and standing next to him was a Korean doctor who specialized in abortions, which made it very clear what they were planning to do. Back in Block 99, Bradley regained consciousness and started calling out Christopher's name into the dark. And the prisoner in the neighboring cell told him the same thing he had already heard, that there was no Christopher in Block 99. Guards came and dragged him out and gave him more shocks, and then one of them told Bradley that Christopher wanted to see him and took him to a cell. And when the door opened, Bradley could not believe what he was seeing because there was no Christopher there at all. Instead, Eleazar was standing inside along with the same group of prisoners Bradley had fought earlier in the yard. The entire Christopher story had been a trap from the very beginning, and it had been designed specifically to lure Bradley into Block 99 so that Eleazar could take his revenge, because Bradley's actions had cost Eleazar $3 million and had also led to Eleazar's own arrest. And on top of all that, Bradley had killed Pedro, who happened to be Eleazar's brother-in-law, and to make matters worse, Eleazar had already paid off the guards in Redleaf to make sure they were all working for him. After that, Bradley was subjected to continuous electric shocks, while Eleazar showed him the photograph of Lauren that Placid had sent and told him that neither he nor his family would be walking away from this. Bradley was dragged back to his cell with Eleazar, holding the remote and sending shocks through the shield whenever he pleased. And at that point, Bradley was physically and emotionally completely broken because every plan he had made to save his family had fallen apart. But while talking quietly to the prisoner in the next cell, he came up with an idea and pulled out the sole of his shoe and pressed it over the sensor on the shield, which stopped the shocks completely. When the guards came back to check on him, Bradley pretended to still be getting shocked and acted accordingly. And when the right moment came, he exploded into action and attacked both guards, killed one of them, locked the other inside a cell, and took the keys for himself. He then moved through the corridor toward the cell where Eleazar was, and on the way he ran into the psycho prisoners who came at him one by one, and he dismantled all of them with a brutality that was difficult to watch because he crushed one man's face under his foot, gouged out another man's eye, and the last one he beat so savagely that the bones of his face gave way under Bradley's final kick. And then there was Eleazar. Bradley knocked him to the ground with one punch, took his phone and told him to call his people and stop Lauren's abortion immediately. Eleazar refused, and Bradley broke his leg, and after that Eleazar had no choice but to make the call, and Lauren's abortion was stopped, and Bradley also made him give the instruction to take Lauren safely to Gil. After that, Bradley dragged Eleazar back and locked him inside a cell with the guards. At that moment, Tugs and his men appeared in the corridor and asked about his men. And Bradley told him that one was dead and one was still alive behind that door, and that if anyone opened it, the other one would die too, because Bradley was waiting for a call from Gil to confirm that Lauren was safe. On the other side, Dr. Placid and the Korean doctor took Lauren to Gil's location as instructed and handed her over. And Placid kept a gun pointed at Gil to make sure he did not try anything, but the moment the two of them turned to leave, Gil pulled out a sniper rifle and shot Placid through the head. And then Lauren took the rifle from him and shot the Korean doctor herself. Then Bradley's phone rang, and it was Gil telling him that Lauren was safe and that he would take care of her from now on. And then Gil handed the phone to Lauren, and Bradley spoke his last words, not really to Lauren, but to his unborn child, telling the child to grow up to be a good person, to stay healthy and wise, and to live a good life. And the sadness in Bradley's voice said everything, because he knew he would never get to meet that child. Outside, Tugs was losing his patience, and shouted asking if Bradley was done, and Bradley asked for one more minute, and went back into the cell, and what he did to Eleazar in that 1 minute, I will let you imagine for yourself. Tugs walked in, raised his gun and shot Bradley in the head,